Dr. Kethavar pressed his three eyes against the observation window, staring at the massive human warship floating in the darkness of space. The alien scientist had been watching this vessel for weeks now, ever since their research ship first spotted it drifting between star systems like a ghost from the past. The ship looked dead. No lights flickered along its hull. No energy signatures pulsed from its engines. It just hung there in the void, silent and still, like a tomb floating through the cosmos. But to Dr. Kethavar, this wasn't just any derelict vessel. This was something far more precious than gold or rare crystals. This was a human ship. "Captain Velthara, we have to board that vessel," Dr. Kethavar said, his voice trembling with excitement. The translation device around his neck turned his alien speech into musical tones that the captain could understand. "Do you realize what we're looking at? Humans have been extinct for decades. Their entire homeworld was destroyed in the Great War. This ship could be the last piece of their civilization." Captain Velthara's thin, butterfly-like wings twitched nervously behind her back. She had been commanding Zephyrian research vessels for over 30 years, and she knew danger when she saw it. Something about this human ship made her uncomfortable, though she couldn't explain why. "Our deep scans show almost no life support active," she replied, studying the readings on her console. "The ship appears completely abandoned. Most systems are offline. If there were any humans aboard, they would have died long ago." Dr. Kethavar's excitement only grew stronger. "Exactly. That's what makes this so perfect. We can study their technology, their culture, their way of life without any interference. Think about it, Captain. We could learn how humans built their ships, how they organized their society, what made them such fierce warriors before they were wiped out." The captain looked at the massive warship again. Even dead and powerless, it looked dangerous. The hull was covered in thick armor plating, and she could see weapons ports scattered along its sides like the eyes of some sleeping beast. Humans had built this ship for war, not exploration or trade. "I don't like it," Captain Velthara muttered. "Human warships were designed to kill. Even empty ones make me nervous." But Dr. Kethavar wouldn't give up. He had spent his entire career studying extinct civilizations, and this was the discovery of a lifetime. "Captain, please. We may never get another chance like this. The ship is drifting toward the border of hostile space, and in a few days we'll lose it forever. This could be our only opportunity to understand what humans were really like." After several minutes of debate, Captain Velthara finally agreed. She ordered her crew to prepare a boarding party of 12 Zephyrians, including Dr. Kethavar, Security Chief Thexmore, and 10 other specialists. They would enter the human ship, conduct a quick survey, and collect whatever data they could before returning to their own vessel. The airlock connection between the two ships took nearly an hour to establish. Human technology was different from Zephyrian systems, and their engineers had to make several adjustments before they could create a safe passage. When the airlock finally opened, a wave of stale, metallic air rushed out, carrying the scent of old machinery and something else that none of the aliens could identify. Dr. Kethavar was the first to step through the airlock into the human ship. The moment his feet touched the metal deck, he knew he was somewhere special. The corridor stretched out before him, disappearing into darkness. Emergency lighting strips along the walls glowed a deep red color, casting strange shadows that seemed to move and shift as the boarding party advanced deeper into the ship. The air felt thick and heavy, filled with the smell of ozone and metal. Their breathing equipment worked overtime to filter the atmosphere, but even through their masks, the aliens could taste something sharp and bitter. It was as if the ship itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Security Chief Thexmore swept the area with his weapon scanner, checking for any signs of danger. The device remained silent, showing no active threats, no weapons pointed in their direction, no energy signatures that might indicate hostile life forms. As far as his equipment could tell, the ship was completely empty. "Incredible," Dr. Kethavar whispered, as he began recording everything with his portable scanner. "Look at this construction. Every surface is reinforced. Every wall is built to withstand massive damage. The humans didn't just build a ship, they built a fortress that could fly through space. The corridors were wider than those on Zephyrian, Vessels designed for beings that were taller and broader than the slender, insect-like aliens. The walls were covered in a grey metal that looked both ancient and indestructible. Everything about the ship spoke of durability over comfort, function over beauty. As they moved deeper into the vessel, a low humming sound began to vibrate through the deck plating beneath their feet. The noise was so deep and constant that the aliens felt it in their bones, in their exoskeletons, in the very core of their being. It was like the heartbeat of some enormous sleeping creature, steady and rhythmic, and somehow alive. Dr. Keithvar paused to examine a wall panel covered in human writing. The symbols were angular and harsh, completely different from the flowing script of his own people. "They built this ship to last forever," he said, running his scanning device over the metal surface. "Even after all these years, after floating dead in space, everything is still intact." The humming grew louder. The moment Security Chief Thexmore activated his advanced scanner to get a better reading of the ship's interior, everything changed in an instant. The device sent out a pulse of energy to map the surrounding area, but instead of giving them information, it triggered something that had been waiting in the darkness. Massive blast doors dropped from the ceiling with a sound like thunder, sealing off every corridor and escape route. The heavy metal barriers crashed down so fast that the aliens barely had time to register what was happening before they found themselves trapped. The doors were thick, reinforced, and clearly designed to contain something dangerous. The dim, red, emergency lighting that had been their only source of illumination suddenly died, plunging them into complete darkness for a terrifying moment. Then, without warning, brilliant white lights blazed to life throughout the corridor, so bright and harsh that the aliens cried out in pain and scrambled to cover their sensitive eyes. Dr. Keithvar stumbled backward, his 3 eyes streaming tears from the sudden intensity. The other Zephyrians pressed themselves against the walls, trying to find shadows that no longer existed. The lighting was so powerful, it seemed designed to disorient and blind anyone caught in its glare. Then came the voice. "Biological contamination. Detected," it announced, and the words seemed to come from everywhere at once. The voice didn't speak through the ship's communication system like they expected. Instead, it felt like the words were being pressed directly into their minds, bypassing their ears entirely and speaking to something deeper inside their consciousness. Initiating Protocol Omega. Foreign entities identified. Dr. Keithvar's translation. Device began making strange clicking sounds as it tried to process what it was hearing. The voice spoke in the human language, but there was something underneath the words that his technology couldn't handle. It wasn't just communication. There were layers of meaning buried in every syllable, emotions and intentions that ran deeper than simple speech. The voice carried anger, determination, and something else that made the alien's skin crawl. It was the sound of something that had been pushed beyond its breaking point and had decided to push back. This wasn't the calm, measured tone of a computer system. This was something that felt personal, almost alive in its intensity. "The ship's not derelict," Thexmore said, his voice shaking as he tried to make sense of their situation. His weapon systems were charging automatically, responding to the threat, but the energy readings showed that his guns were useless. The corridor was sealed tight, with no targets to shoot at and no way to escape. "We're locked in." As if responding to his words, alarms began blaring throughout the ship. The sound was unlike anything the Zephyrians had ever heard. The klaxons wailed at frequencies that seemed specifically designed to cause pain to their sensitive hearing organs. The noise burrowed into their heads like living things, making it impossible to think clearly or communicate effectively. The aliens pressed their hands to their ears, trying to block out the sound, but it was no use. The alarms were coming from everywhere, echoing through the metal walls and floor, vibrating through their bodies until their bones ached. It was psychological warfare designed to break down their resistance and fill them with panic. Through the chaos of lights and sound, they heard something that froze their blood. Human voices, speaking to each other through the ship's internal communication system. The voices were calm, professional, and terrifyingly real. These weren't recordings or computer-generated sounds. These were actual humans, alive and active. Somewhere inside the ship. "Artemis, confirm containment of subjects in Section C7, said a voice that belonged to a human female. She spoke with the authority of someone in command, someone who was used to being obeyed without question. "Confirmed, Captain Jiho. 12 entities secured. "Analyzing threat assessment," replied another voice, this one belonging to the ship's artificial intelligence system. Dr. Kethvar felt his world spinning out of control. Humans weren't extinct. They were here on this ship, and they had been waiting. The realization hit him like a physical blow. This wasn't a derelict vessel they had stumbled upon by accident. This was a trap, carefully set and patiently maintained. The humans had been watching them from the moment they approached. They had allowed the Zephyrians to board their ship, had let them walk right into this carefully prepared containment area. Every step of the process had been planned and controlled by minds that understood warfare better than the aliens had ever imagined. Captain Jiho's voice came through the speakers again, and this time she was speaking directly to the trapped aliens. Her words were translated by their devices, but the cold certainty in her tone needed no interpretation. "Welcome aboard the Taekwon," she said. "You are now subjects in a military research operation. Your species made a grave error when you assumed humanity was extinct. We have been studying your approach for weeks, learning your capabilities, understanding your weaknesses." Thexmore tried to activate his emergency beacon to signal their ship, but his equipment showed no response. The humans had thought of everything. They were completely cut off from the outside world, trapped inside a vessel that had transformed from a derelict hulk into a sophisticated prison in a matter of seconds. "How you wanted to study human technology," Captain Jiho continued, her voice echoing through the sealed corridor. "Now you'll have the opportunity to experience it firsthand. But I should warn you, the lessons we teach tend to be rather permanent." The white lights dimmed slightly, just enough to let the aliens see their surroundings clearly. They were in a corridor with no exits, no windows, and no obvious weaknesses. The walls were smooth metal, reinforced and impenetrable. They had walked willingly into a cage, and now the door was locked behind them. As the hours passed in their sealed prison, Dr. Kethvar began to notice something the others had missed. Small access panels along the walls occasionally flickered, with light, showing brief glimpses of data streams and information displays. His curiosity as a scientist overcame his fear, and he began studying these panels more closely. The first terminal he managed to access showed basic ship information, but as he dug deeper, he discovered something that made his blood run cold. This wasn't just any human vessel. This was the KDS Taekwon, and according to the records he was reading, it had a history that explained everything about their current situation. "Listen to this," Dr. Kethvar called to his fellow prisoners, his voice barely above a whisper. He had learned to speak quietly since the humans were obviously monitoring everything they said. According to these files, the Taekwon was humanity's last major warship. It was carrying 300 crew members when the final battle for Earth began. Thexmore moved closer to read over the scientist's shoulder. The security chief had been trying to find weaknesses in their prison, but so far the humans had thought of everything. 300 against how many enemy ships? The data made Dr. Kethvar's hands shake as he scrolled through the battle reports. Over 2,000 vessels in the attacking fleet. The humans were outnumbered almost 7-1, and their enemies had superior technology and firepower. By every logical calculation, the Taekwon should have been destroyed in the first few minutes of combat. But that wasn't what had happened. Instead, Dr. Kethvar found himself reading about something that challenged everything he thought he knew about warfare and survival. The human crew had done something that seemed impossible, something that went against every military strategy his people had ever studied. They implemented something called Protocol Omega, he continued, his voice growing more amazed with each file he opened. But this wasn't a surrender protocol or an evacuation plan. It was something else entirely. The combat logs painted a picture that was both terrifying and fascinating. When faced with certain death, the humans hadn't given up or tried to flee. Instead, they had transformed their entire approach to warfare in real time, adapting and evolving their tactics faster than their enemies could respond. Look at these weapon modifications. Dr. Kethvar transmitted the data to the others through their shared communication link. The humans started the battle with standard military equipment, but within hours, they were using improvised weapons that their enemies had never seen before. They turned maintenance tools into guns, converted cargo containers into bombs, and reprogrammed their computer systems to create new types of attacks. What amazed him most was the speed of these changes. Most species needed months or years to develop new military technologies, but the humans had been innovating in the middle of combat, creating solutions to problems they had never faced before. Their desperation had somehow unlocked a level of creativity that seemed almost supernatural. The ship's corridors had been transformed into a maze of death traps and ambush points. Every section of the vessel had been modified to serve multiple purposes, with hidden weapon systems and improvised barriers that could be activated at a moment's notice. The humans had turned their own ship into a weapon that was unlike anything their enemies had ever encountered. They didn't just fight, Dr. Kethvar explained to his team, his scientific mind struggling to process what he was reading. They evolved. In real time, under fire, while facing impossible odds, they became something new, something their enemies couldn't predict or counter. The psychological warfare techniques were perhaps the most disturbing part of the records. The humans had studied their attackers during the battle, learning their weaknesses and fears, then exploiting those vulnerabilities in ways that went beyond simple military tactics. They had gotten inside their enemies' heads, turning their own minds against them. Thexmore found another terminal and began reading the personal logs of the ship's officers. What he discovered there was even more unsettling than the combat reports. "Listen to this entry from Captain Minji, recorded during the height of the battle," he said, his voice tight with emotion. The captain's words came through their translators with crystal clarity, and the message they contained sent chills through every alien in the room. "The enemy expects us to break under pressure," Captain Minji had recorded. "They think that if they hit us hard enough, fast enough, we'll collapse like every other species they've conquered. But they don't understand what they're dealing with." There was a pause in the recording, filled with the sounds of explosions and weapon fire in the background. When Captain Minji continued, her voice carried a certainty that was both inspiring and terrifying. "Humans don't break. We bend, we adapt, we become whatever we need to become to survive. And when we're pushed to our absolute limit, when death is staring us in the face and there's nowhere left to run, that's when we become something else entirely, something our enemies can't comprehend or defeat." The recording continued with details about the crew's transformation during the battle. Ordinary maintenance workers had become tactical geniuses. Scientists had turned into weapons specialists. Even the ship's cook had contributed by creating chemical compounds that disrupted enemy equipment. Every single person aboard had evolved, beyond their original role, becoming part of a collective organism focused entirely on survival. They won, Dr. Kethvar realized, his voice filled with awe. Against impossible odds, outnumbered and outgunned, they actually won. The attacking fleet retreated after losing over half their ships to a single human vessel, but the victory had come at a cost. The Taekwon had been heavily damaged, its crew reduced to a fraction of its original number. The ship had been left, drifting in space, appearing dead to outside observers while its remaining crew worked to rebuild and prepare for whatever came next. And now, decades later, they were still here, still adapting, still learning, still ready to teach anyone who made the mistake of underestimating humanity exactly what they were capable of. The woman's voice came from everywhere and nowhere at once, flowing through the ventilation system like smoke. Dr. Kethvar and his remaining team members pressed themselves against the cold metal walls, their eyes darting around the corridor as they tried to locate the source of the sound. "Welcome to the Taekwon," the voice said, and what made it even more terrifying was that she spoke in perfect Zephyrian, not through a translation device like they used, but actual fluent speech in their native language. "I am Captain Hana, and you've been studying my ship for exactly 47 minutes and 32 seconds. The precision of that timing sent ice through Dr. Kethvar's veins. The humans hadn't just been watching them since they boarded. They had been tracking every second, counting every minute, measuring their movements with scientific accuracy. This wasn't casual observation. This was detailed analysis. Dr. Kethvar looked around and realized with growing horror that their group had shrunk. When they first entered the ship, there had been 12 Zephyrians in the boarding party. Now he could only count 9. 3 of his colleagues were simply gone, vanished without a sound or struggle. He hadn't even noticed when it happened. "Where are the others?" whispered one of the remaining scientists, her voice shaking with fear. "They haven't been killed," Captain Hannah's voice replied, somehow hearing their quiet conversation. "They've been relocated for individual study. Don't worry, they're perfectly safe. We're very careful with our research subjects. The casual way." She said research subjects made Dr. Kethvar's stomach turn. They had come here to study humans, but somehow the situation had been completely reversed. Now they were the ones being examined, tested and analyzed by minds that clearly understood them better than they understood themselves. "We've been watching you through sensor networks you didn't know existed," Captain Hannah continued, her voice moving through the air conditioning system like a ghost. "Every step you've taken, every word you've spoken, every biometric reading from your bodies. We've been learning your weaknesses, studying your movement patterns, analyzing your psychological responses to stress." As she spoke, Dr. Kethvar began to notice things he had missed before. Tiny cameras hidden in the wall panels, pressure sensors built into the floor, audio pickups disguised as maintenance fixtures. The entire ship was alive with surveillance equipment, all of it focused on gathering information about their unwilling guests. The humans had turned their vessel into a sophisticated laboratory, and the Zephyrians were the specimens being studied under a microscope. Every breath they took, every word they spoke, every nervous gesture was being recorded and analyzed by minds that had decades of experience in understanding their enemies. "Do you know what 37 humans can accomplish when they have nothing left to lose?" Captain Hannah asked, and there was something in her voice that made the aliens huddle closer together for comfort. It wasn't anger or hatred. It was something far worse. It was cold, calculated certainty. Footsteps began echoing through the corridors around them, but the sounds seemed to come from impossible directions. Steps above them when there should be no upper level. Movement behind walls that appeared solid. The acoustic properties of the ship had been modified to confuse and disorient anyone who didn't know its secrets. The remaining Zephyrians pressed themselves back to back, forming a defensive circle as the footsteps grew closer. But no matter which direction they faced, the sounds always seemed to be coming from somewhere else. The humans were moving through their ship like ghosts, using passages and routes that didn't appear on any schematic. "The Taekwon isn't just our home," Captain Hannah's voice explained. "It's become part of us. We've lived in these corridors for so long that we know every vibration, every sound, every way the air moves through the ventilation system. This ship is an extension of our bodies, and you're trapped inside our nervous system." Dr. Kethvar tried to understand what she meant, but the concept was beyond his experience. The humans hadn't just survived on their damaged vessel. They had adapted to it so completely that they had become something new, something that existed in perfect harmony with their technological environment. The footsteps stopped, and for a moment there was complete silence. Then Captain Hannah spoke again, and this time her voice carried a weight of history and pain that made the aliens feel ashamed of their presence here. "Your people destroyed our world," she said, and the temperature in the corridor seemed to drop several degrees. "You wiped out billions of humans, burned our cities, turned our beautiful blue planet into a lifeless rock floating in space. You thought that would be the end of us." The silence stretched out, heavy with the memory of genocide and loss. "Doctor." Kethvar had read about the destruction of Earth in his historical files, but it had always been just another entry in the records of extinct civilizations. Now surrounded by the survivors of that catastrophe, he began to understand the true weight of what his people had done. "But you made one mistake," Captain Hannah continued, and now her voice was sharp as a blade. "You assumed that losing our world would make us weaker. You thought that tragedy would break our spirit and leave us helpless." A new sound began to echo through the corridors, not footsteps this time, but something else, a rhythmic tapping, like fingers drumming against metal. It was coming from all directions at once, as if dozens of humans were moving through the ship's hidden passages, communicating with each other through some kind of code. Instead, you gave us something far more dangerous than hope, Captain Hana said. You gave us nothing left to lose, and humans with nothing left to lose don't become weaker. We become something that your worst nightmares can't imagine. The tapping sound stopped, and Dr. Kethva realized that they were completely surrounded. The humans were everywhere, moving through their ship like blood through veins, coordinating their actions with a precision that spoke of years of practice and preparation. They weren't just being hunted. They were being studied, tested, and taught a lesson about what happens when you underestimate the species that had once ruled an entire planet. The hours passed like a nightmare that wouldn't end. One by one, Dr. Kethva watched his colleagues disappear into the shadows of the ship. They weren't dragged away screaming or killed in violent confrontations. They simply vanished as quietly as morning mist, until only 3 Zephyrians remained huddled in the corridor that had become their prison. Dr. Kethva, Security Chief Thexmore, and Communications Officer Yeldana pressed themselves against the cold metal wall, their breathing apparatus working overtime as fear consumed their oxygen faster than normal. The ship around them had become a living thing, full of sounds and movements that spoke of intelligent life, moving just beyond their perception. Then, without warning, the footsteps stopped. The mysterious sounds that had been haunting them for hours fell silent. Even the constant hum of the ship's systems seemed to quiet down, as if the entire vessel was holding its breath in anticipation of what would come next. Section of the wall that had appeared completely solid suddenly slid aside with a soft hiss. Dr. Kethva nearly jumped out of his exoskeleton as 3 figures stepped through the opening into their corridor. For the first time since boarding this vessel, he was looking at actual living humans. Captain Hana was not what he had expected. She was small by human standards, probably no taller than Dr. Kethva himself, but there was something about her presence that filled the entire space. Her face was marked with scars that spoke of battles fought and survived. Her dark hair was streaked with premature gray, and her eyes held a depth of experience that made the alien scientist feel like a child in comparison. Behind her stood 2 other survivors. Deho appeared to be a young human male, though the lines around his eyes suggested he had aged far beyond his years. His hands bore the calluses of someone who worked with machinery and weapons every day. Sunmi was an older human female, her face kind but watchful, her stance that of someone ready to fight or flee at a moment's notice. All 3 humans were lean to the point of being gaunt, their bodies showing the effects of years spent surviving on limited resources. But there was nothing weak or desperate about them. They moved with the fluid confidence of predators who knew they owned their territory completely. "We could have killed all of you within the first hour," Captain Hana said, her voice calm and matter-of-fact. She spoke in perfect Zephyrian, without any translation device visible. "The moment you activated that scanner, we had dozens of ways to eliminate your entire boarding party. Explosive decompression, toxic gas, electrical systems overload, or simply opening the airlocks and letting space do the work for us." Dr. Kethva felt his legs trembling beneath him. The casual way she discussed their potential deaths made it clear that these weren't empty threats. The humans had the capability to kill them all, and they had chosen not to use it. "Instead, we gave you a demonstration," Captain Hana continued, gesturing to the empty corridor where 12 aliens had once stood. "We wanted you to experience what it feels like to be studied, analyzed, and controlled by a superior intelligence. Do you understand what you've witnessed here today?" Dr. Kethva's voice trembled as it passed through his translator. The device struggled to convert his emotional state into words that the humans could understand. You were teaching us. This whole thing was a lesson." Captain Hana nodded slowly, her scarred face showing the first hint of satisfaction. "Exactly. Your people made the mistake of thinking that humans were just another species to be catalogued and dismissed. You thought our extinction meant you could ignore us forever. You were wrong." She began walking around the 3 remaining aliens, not in a threatening way, but like a teacher addressing students who needed to understand an important concept. Humans don't become extinct. We evolve, we adapt, we survive by becoming more dangerous than whatever tries to destroy us. It's not just our technology or our weapons that make us formidable. It's our ability to change, to become something new when the old ways don't work anymore. Daiho spoke for the first time, his voice carrying the weight of years spent in isolation. When your people destroyed Earth, you thought you were eliminating a threat. Instead, you created something far worse. You gave us a reason to become everything we never wanted to be. Sunmi stepped forward, her eyes fixed on Dr. Kethvar with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. 37 of us, using one damaged warship and improvised equipment, just demonstrated complete control over 12 members of a technologically advanced species. We contained you, studied you, and manipulated you without breaking a sweat. Captain Hana gestured to the ship around them, her arms taking in the corridors, the hidden passages, the surveillance systems that had tracked their every movement. Now imagine what billions of surviving humans might accomplish if properly motivated. Imagine what we could do if we decided that your species needed to be taught a more permanent lesson. The threat hung in the air like a physical presence. Dr. Kethvar realized that they weren't just dealing with survivors, they were facing the representatives of a species that had been pushed beyond its breaking point and had emerged from that crucible as something entirely new. Thexmore, who had remained silent throughout the encounter, finally found his voice. "What do you want from us?" he whispered. Captain Hana's expression softened slightly, but her eyes remained hard as steel. "We want you to go back to your people and tell them the truth. Tell them that humanity endures. Tell them that we're not victims to be pitied or extinct specimens to be studied. We're a force that transcends our limitations when pushed beyond our breaking point." She paused, letting her words sink in before continuing. "Tell them that there are humans scattered throughout the galaxy, survivors who have learned to thrive in places where others would die. Tell them that we're watching, learning and preparing, and tell them that the next time they encounter us, they had better approach with respect rather than curiosity." Dr. Kethvar looked around at his scattered research equipment, thought about his missing team members, who were somewhere else in the ship being studied and tested, and finally understood the magnitude of what had happened here. They hadn't discovered an extinct civilization. They had stumbled into a classroom run by the most dangerous teachers in the galaxy. "I'll document everything," he said finally, his voice stronger now as his scientific mind began to process the implications. "Your people deserve to be understood, not underestimated. This knowledge needs to be shared." Captain Hana smiled for the first time since appearing, but it was a grim expression that held no warmth. "Then our lesson is complete. You'll be returned to your ship with your colleagues, and you'll carry this message back to your people. But remember this, Dr. Kethvar, we let you leave because we chose to. Don't make the mistake of thinking you escaped." The wall panel slid open again, revealing the path back to their own vessel. As the three aliens stumbled toward freedom, they carried with them the knowledge that humanity was far from extinct, and far more dangerous than anyone had ever imagined.